Stop. Before you ask for just a little more, listen to this. In a forgotten coastal village, a fisherman whispered a simple wish, and the ocean answered. But the moment that water spirit rose from the deep, the air changed. Waves froze. Even the moon hid behind the clouds, as if the universe knew what was about to unfold. That wish didn't bring him blessings. It unlocked a chain of events that twisted into greed, morphed into power, and exploded into a disaster that swallowed an entire kingdom. If you think desire is harmless, if you think you'd never fall for the temptation of more, this story will make you question yourself. Because by the end, you'll realize the fisherman wasn't the only one being tested. Imagine waking up in a world where every desire, even the ones you are too afraid to speak, could be granted without warning. That's the world Adewale stepped into, long before he realized the ocean listens carefully, but answers fiercely. In the village of Okuodo, where morning fog rolled in like silent spirits, and fishermen whispered prayers before touching their nets, Adewale lived with a hunger that the sea itself could feel. He was respected but invisible, hardworking but unsatisfied, blessed yet blind to his blessings. As he paddled into the dawn every morning, he didn't just chase fish. He chased a destiny he believed was hiding from him. And on a certain morning, when the sky carried a strange gold tint and the waves seemed unusually still, Adewale didn't know he was rowing straight into a bargain that would test not his strength but the very substance of his soul. What the elders never told him was simple. The sea tests ambition the way fire tests gold. Adewale had always believed his fortunes were trapped under the waves, waiting for the right moment to rise. And on that enchanted morning, he pushed farther into the ocean than every cautionary tale had warned. As his canoe drifted past unfamiliar waters, a whisper of wind brushed his cheek. Not cold, not warm, just unnervingly aware. His net, heavy with failure from the previous week, sank deep into the glowing water. Then came the tug, the strongest he had ever felt, like something ancient was pulling back. A chill ran through him. This was not fish. This was no ordinary day. As the waves hushed, as if holding their breath, Adewale leaned over his canoe and dragged up the object that would unravel everything he thought he wanted and everything he thought he knew about himself. When the object finally broke the water's surface, Adewale staggered back. In his hands lay a heavy, barnacle-encrusted bottle shaped like a god, glowing faintly as though a heartbeat pulsed within. Legends had whispered of ocean spirits granting rewards or ruin, but no one ever expected to confront such tales in daylight. As his fingers brushed off the shell fragments, the bottle shuddered, and the ocean erupted with a ring of shimmering light. A column of mist spiraled upward, forming the graceful silhouette of a woman whose presence silenced even the wind. Her eyes were ancient tide pools, deep and painfully knowing. "Fisherman," she said, her voice rippling through his bones, "you have broken the seal of Iyanla Orun, keeper of one wish." Adewale froze, torn between fear and excitement. Every story told to children as warning suddenly felt real, and for the first time the sea seemed alive enough to listen. Iyanla studied Adewale as though she could read the desires he'd buried beneath pride and poverty. "One wish," she repeated, "but understand this. Wishings are waves, beautiful at their rise, destructive at their fall." Adewale's heart pounded. One wish, one chance to erase his struggles. He thought of the days he returned home empty-handed, the nights he overheard villagers speak of his bad luck, the countless mornings his wife assured him blessings would come in their time. He was tired of waiting, tired of mediocrity, tired of being the fisherman whose name no one whispered with admiration. Swallowing hard, he whispered the words that had lived in his chest for years. "I want to be rich, richer than every fisherman, richer than every man in this village." The spirit's eyes dimmed, not in anger, but in sorrow. "So be it," she breathed. The water surged. His fate was rewritten. When Adewale raced back to shore, he expected nothing. But as he stepped on land, everything had changed. His small mud brick hut had transformed into a vast compound, adorned with wooden pillars and shimmering fabrics flown from distant lands. Fresh nets hung neatly on carved racks, and a gleaming fishing boat, large enough for chiefs to gasp, rested proudly at the shoreline. Villagers gathered, their mouths wide with disbelief. Some murmured blessings, others whispered suspicion. But Adewale stood tall, the warm hum of newfound power vibrating beneath his skin. His wife, Dora Jaye, emerged from the compound, eyes wide with fear and awe. She asked no questions. She simply touched his arm, as if to check whether he was still real. Adewale smiled for the first time in months. The sea had rewarded him. His wish was true, and in that moment, gratitude bloomed, brief, beautiful, and destined not to last. Within days, Adewale's life shifted from simplicity to spectacle. Markets buzzed when his name was mentioned. Strangers bowed their heads respectfully as he passed. Children pointed at his new boat like it was a mythical creature. Adewale soaked it in. The attention, the praise, the way people's voices softened when addressing him. Prosperity came easily now. The sea seemed too eager to please him. Each fishing trip brought nets heavy with catch. Each market day ended with chests full of cowries. But beneath all the admiration lay a dangerous seed. A seed that whispered, "If one blessing came so easily, imagine how many more you deserve." Adewale ignored the warning bells. He believed he had finally unlocked the life he always deserved. But he didn't realize that blessings offered without wisdom easily become the chains that bind a man to his own downfall. Adewale's first taste of wealth was sweet, intoxicating, and dangerously addictive. But as the weeks turned to months, a quiet dissatisfaction crept into his mind. His newfound riches, though vast, began to feel small compared to the glory he imagined he could achieve. Every time villagers praised him, he wondered why they didn't bow lower. Every time he passed the chief's compound, he wondered why his own wasn't larger. The gratitude that once warmed his heart disappeared like mist under the sun. Instead, he began to dream of ruling, dominating, and surpassing every man alive. Dora Jaiye sensed the shift. She warned him gently, saying a heart that cannot be satisfied will stay thirsty even when submerged in blessings. But Adewale brushed her off. Humility was for people who lacked options. He felt unstoppable, untouchable. He believed the world owed him more. And arrogance, like a tide, always rises silently before it strikes. Unable to shake the urge for more, Adewale began expanding aggressively. He purchased farmlands, even though he knew nothing about farming. He bought cattle, even though he couldn't tell a sick animal from a healthy one. He hired workers, dozens, just to be called master. And as his ambitions swelled, so did the distance between him and his wife. Duro Jaiye tried to remind him of who he used to be, but Adewale no longer recognized that man. The humble fisherman was buried beneath layers of pride and self-importance. Soon, he stopped praying before fishing, stopped greeting elders, stopped attending community gatherings. While the villagers saw his success, they also saw the coldness blooming in his eyes. Pride, once a shadow, now stood openly beside him. And somewhere beneath the waves, the spirit who granted his wish watched silently, knowing the tide of consequences was drawing near. The turning point came during the annual harvest festival. The entire village gathered to honor the land, the ancestors, and the sea. Chiefs, elders, and families contributed offerings, yams, goats, baskets of palm fruits. Adewale attended, expecting praise, admiration, and a seat at the high table. But the chief began announcing the names of those who donated to the feast, and Adewale's name was not mentioned, because he had given nothing. The silence that followed pierced his pride like a spear. Whispering spread across the crowd. Some glanced at him with disappointment, others smirked, remembering the man he had once been. Instead of shame awakening humility, humiliation awakened fury. Adewale stormed to the center of the gathering. "How dare you ignore me?" he shouted. "I am the wealthiest man in this village." The chief looked at him calmly and replied, "We honor generosity, not greed." The words hit him harder than any blow. Adewale left the festival trembling with rage. In his mind, the village had turned against him. His wife followed him home, pleading for him to see reason, but Adewale's pride drowned out every voice but his own. He accused her of siding with the villagers. He accused the elders of jealousy. He accused the entire community of plotting to undermine him. By the next morning, Adewale made a decision he believed would cement his legacy forever. He would expand even more. More boats, more workers, more land, more everything. He believed that if he acquired enough, he could force the village to recognize his greatness. But pride is blind. It cannot see the cliff ahead. And while Adewale built his empire on shaky foundations, dark clouds gathered above the village. Clouds that carried the storms his arrogance had summoned. The sea never forgets, and neither does a violated blessing. The first blow came suddenly. A violent storm ripped through the coast with a ferocity the villagers had never seen. Adewale's grand fishing boat, the symbol of his rise, was shattered into pieces. Splinters washed ashore like broken pride. Before he could recover from the shock, News arrived that pests had devoured his newly purchased farmland. Then disease claimed half of his cattle. Then his borrowers refused to repay him, claiming hardship and invoking the sympathy of the village elders. It was as though every investment he had made was collapsing in perfect sequence, like a tower built too tall on sand. The villagers who once admired him now watched with quiet pity or silent satisfaction. Adewale felt the world closing in, tightening around him like a fishing net. For the first time since his wish, he tasted fear, not from poverty, but from losing the identity he had constructed so desperately. His workers began quitting one by one. Some left because there was no work. Others left because they feared the curse that seemed to follow him. Duro Jaye tried to stand beside him, but Adewale's unraveling pride lashed out at her too. He became irritable, restless, resentful of every comforting word she spoke. Soon, she couldn't bear the constant emotional storm. One morning, she quietly packed her things and left to stay with her sister. Adewale returned home that evening to an empty compound, the silence louder than any thunder. With every piece of wealth slipping through his fingers, he realized too late that the true loss wasn't the money or the land. It was the relationships he destroyed. But stubbornness chained him. Instead of seeking help, he hid behind pride's final mask, denial. And denial is always the last step before a fall can become irreversible. Days turned into weeks. Adewale wandered the village like a ghost, ignored by some, pitied by others, avoided by those who remembered his arrogance. He ate less, slept less, spoke less. Eventually, the village forgot to fear him. They simply forgot him. The once mighty fisherman now looked older than his years. His wealth evaporated, his pride deflated, his heart fractured. One evening, after failing to catch even a single fish with his old torn nets, he sat at the shore watching the sun sink into the water. It struck him that he had gained everything he wanted, only to lose everything he needed. Desperation pressed on his chest, and for the first time in months, Adewale whispered a prayer, not for riches, not for power, but for understanding. Tears blurred his vision as he admitted to the waves, "I was wrong." The ocean responded with silence, a silence heavy with truth. The water glowed again, faint at first, then brighter, until a familiar silhouette rose from the waves. Iyanla Oro appeared, not fierce, not triumphant, but sorrowful. Her presence brought a warmth that cut through Adewale's despair. "Adewale," she said softly, "the tide has turned, and now you finally understand." He lifted his head, shame burning through his tears. "Spirit, I destroyed everything. I became a man I no longer recognize. Please, give me one more wish." Iyanla shook her head gently. "I grant only one wish. I do not undo choices. I reveal the truth hidden within them." His heart sank, but the spirit continued. "However, lessons can be gifts too." She reached out and touched his forehead, and for the first time in months, Adewale felt peace. Not happiness, not wealth, but peace. A peace that settled quietly, reminding him that transformation begins where pride ends. "Adewale," Iyanla said softly, her voice soft as drifting sand. "Riches can fill your hands, but only humility can fill your life." Her words cut through him like a tide washing away old footprints. "Start again," she instructed, but this time, not with greed, but with gratitude. Adewale closed his eyes as the warmth flowed through him. When he opened them, the spirit had begun dissolving back into mist. "I'm sorry, truly sorry." Inyala Orun paused, her face glowing like moonlight on calm waters. Remember this, the sea gives only to those who respect its depth. With that, she faded completely, leaving Adewale alone on the shore, not abandoned, but reborn. The waves rolled forward gently, as though embracing him, and for the first time since his downfall, he understood that the greatest miracle was not wealth, but wisdom gained through loss. The next morning, Adewale returned to the village, not as a wealthy man, not as a broken man, but as a humbled one. Those who saw him noticed the difference immediately. His shoulders no longer carried arrogance. His gaze no longer held entitlement. He began helping where help was needed. He repaired fishing nets for widows. He shared whatever small catch he had with families struggling to feed their children. He greeted elders respectfully and apologized to those he had wronged. Some forgave him immediately, others took longer, but Adewale didn't rush redemption. He understood now that trust, once cracked, must be rebuilt slowly, piece by piece. As he walked, something unexpected happened. For the first time, children laughed freely around him again, and villagers spoke his name without bitterness. Humility was drawing him back into the community he once pushed away, and that was a treasure no magic could grant. Weeks passed, and Adewale began repairing his small canoe, not to reclaim greatness, but to reclaim purpose. As he sanded the wood and tightened the ropes, Dorojaye returned, not with anger, but with cautious hope. She watched him repairing the boat, his movement steady, patient, transformed. She approached quietly. "Adewale," she said softly. He turned slowly, tears forming instantly. "I have learning," he whispered. She nodded. "Then I can stay." Their reconciliation was not dramatic. It was gentle, like sunrise after a cold night. Together they rebuilt what pride had shattered, not wealth, but partnership, love, understanding. With each passing day, Adewale felt lighter, stronger, more human. The villagers saw the change and slowly welcomed him back into the fold. Success no longer meant domination to him. It meant belonging. Years later, Adewale became known across Okon-Odo, not as the richest man, but as the man who learned the ocean's most difficult lesson. Children gathered around him at the shoreline to hear stories, not of magical wealth, but of how desire without humility becomes a storm that destroys its owner first. He taught young fishermen to respect the sea, to respect themselves, and to value gratitude above ambition. Whenever asked about his past, he didn't hide it. He spoke openly about the arrogance that nearly swallowed him whole, and the spirit who had given him exactly what he asked for, but not what he needed. His voice carried no bitterness, only truth, and the villagers saw him not as a cautionary tale, but as a man who walked through pride's fire and emerged wiser. Adewale finally understood. Real wealth is measured not in possessions, but in peace. On quiet evenings, he and Dorojaye would sit by the water, watching waves glide to shore. Sometimes, the ocean glowed faintly, just enough to remind him that the spirit still watched, still guided, still guarded the balance between desire and destiny. Adewale never wished again. He didn't need to. His heart was full. His life was steady. He had rediscovered the joy in small blessings, the strength in humility, and the grounding power of gratitude. And the villagers, now guided by his wisdom, often repeated the proverb shaped from his journey. A man who chases the world loses himself, but a man who embraces humility finds everything he truly needs. The sea whispered softly at their feet, its eternal message echoing through the village. Adewale smiled, knowing at last that the tide had returned him, not to wealth, but to himself. My friend, If this story touched you, don't let it end here. Share it. Pass it forward. Because in Africa, a folk tale is not complete until it travels from one heart to another. If you felt Adewale's rise, if you felt his fall, if you felt his awakening, then join this growing circle of seekers, dreamers, and truth hunters. Follow African Folktales by Sammie, where every story holds a lesson, every lesson holds a mirror, and every mirror shows you. Like, comment, share, because wisdom shared becomes wisdom multiplied. See you in the next tale, and remember, may your desires be guided by humility, and may your blessings never turn to storms.